All right, guys, welcome. I appreciate everybody who tunes in now and tunes in later. Um, it seems like half my viewing audience seems to be from over in England, so they kind of appreciate some of these earlier videos. Arn, what's going on?
Well, I don't know if you caught what I was saying before, but I mean, this morning as I'm getting ready to come in here, uh, we were reconfiguring the studio here at home, to get better audio and sound after that last production I just did. So we moved the green screen to a new wall, means we paint the new wall green so we can use the whole wall and not have to be so close to it. Maybe get a little bit of audio out of that, better audio, I mean. So I left the door open, and our giant dog comes in and gets all excited because he sees somebody through the window and knocks everything over, knocks the paint can over, spills a gallon of paint all over the floor. And now my house is covered in green dog footprints.
Oh no, and I can imagine that was just a handful trying to get it off the dog too.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a bit of a day.
Now I had some kind of fun questions in the beginning, some things that I've noticed in various videos. Are you a fan of Godzilla?
Yes, Godzilla was my hero when I was a kid, and still today, I'm very frustrated that they will never do that movie right.
What was your like? Did you watch the new one by chance, Godzilla versus Kong?
That was so disappointing. It's not just that I was disappointed in the character, although I was. Godzilla versus Kong is just beyond stupid across the charts everywhere. And I say that about a Godzilla movie. I mean, there's never been a smart Godzilla movie, with the possible exception of the very first one. But they don't even make an attempt to explain what the breath weapon is. I mean, this is just all a byproduct of his apparently experiencing, thermonuclear fallout or whatever. And they keep changing his backstory around. But the way science fiction should be is if you want to plead for one ridiculous thing, and that being this mutant lizard that's 200 feet tall, or how his height varies in every movie, but originally 50 meters tall. So if you want to plead for this one ridiculous thing about this animal that's just way too big, make everything else in the movie as realistic as it can possibly be, and try to come up with some kind of potential explanation for how he got that way or what have you. But with Godzilla versus Kong, they threw everything out the window, just everything. Suddenly, the hero of the story is the podcasting conspiracy theorist. And that's the hero. The people who believe that fluoride was a communist plot, that's the hero. And the earth is hollow. And if you take a picture of an energy source, you can email the signature of that energy source and somehow get the energy from it. And just everything about that movie was just fucking stupid.
Yeah, I as a kid I used to love the Godzilla movies, especially like the subtitle ones where they're just like looking off at a distance and there's like a guy in a giant suit.
Yeah. Like I said, they're never going to do the movie right. The time to have done that right would have been 1998, when TriStar had a chance to put CGI onto Godzilla and really do it right. But they hate when the Devlin brothers got a hold of that movie. They admitted publicly that they always hated Godzilla, and so they didn't give a shit about the fan base. They didn't care how they did the movie. They took everything that made this 50-year-old icon cool in the hearts of so many kaiju fans, and they took away everything cool and tied it down and shot it. So they just showed huge disrespect but that's why the movie bombed.
And one other question that I've always wanted to kind of talk to you about, you have a love for pirates, I'd say. You got the parakeet on your shoulder from time to time.
I have an Amazon. I have a double yellow-headed Amazon parrot.
Yep. Now, with all that being said, because you have your own unique personality and the spin that you put on these conversations, like Me as a Christian, when I talk to a lot of atheists, they quote you as being somebody who has inspired them. Was there anything in particular that made you want to get into YouTube, or was this just like, hey, it's something new I'm going to try?
Well, you know, I became an activist quite deliberately. I mean, I was on before I got on YouTube. I was on Usenet, if anybody remembers what that is. You know, back in the late 1990s, there was a news group called Talk.Origins, and I got on there and was arguing with a bunch of PhDs whom I later met in real life. And I had professional scientists on one side, and I had the theologians on the other. And it only took a hot minute to figure out who's got the real goods and who's full of shit. And as I said, this is the late 1990s. It just say, yeah, this was the late 1990s, and what got me as an activist was one of the people that I was arguing with on these groups was bragging that his evangelical congregation had gone against the Johnson Amendment, that they'd been voting as a coalition, that all these ministers got on the phone with each other and arranged to tell all their congregations to vote exactly as a block, so that they could make sure to elect certain judges and senators and school board members and all of that, so that the entire country, all of the authorities, most of them, would be Christian nationalists. So that was the goal. And the people that I was talking to in, I don't know, in 1997, 98, the people I was talking to at that time were Reconstructionists. And so they were telling me their goal, which ended up being revealed when the Discovery Institute accidentally leaked what they called the wedge agenda. And the goal was to make sure that you have all these Christian nationalists as all these judges, make sure that your percentage of judges is high enough that should evolution ever get challenged, then you would have a judge rule favorably for creationism. And then you would be able to undermine science education. And in the agenda, it says if you can undermine science education, then that leaves people confused and open to the idea of mystical supernatural nonsense. But they had to get rid of the scientific explanation first. And then what they intended to do was to establish a government replacing our representative or our democratic republic, replacing that with a theocracy. And then in the terms of the Reconstructionists that I was talking to at that time, they wanted to erect a government that would enforce Levitical law, not just God's law, but worse than Sharia. I mean, death penalty for picking up sticks on a Sunday, you know, the most extreme group imaginable. And they were bragging about how successful they already were in establishing all of these people in all of these offices, that it was already well underway. And so I realized that there was very little that I could do, you know, especially there was the moment in the movie where the villain tells you what they're going to do, and it's seemingly too late to do anything about it. You know, they've already positioned all their people. They've got this 5-year plan, and everything's going to go exactly according to that plan. And it did, right up until 2005, at the end of that 5-year plan, when they went before a Republican Bush-appointed conservative Christian judge in the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial. And much to everyone's surprise and much to the judge's credit, he ruled on the side of science. That was outstanding. But prior to that, as I said, this was between, let's say, around Y2K. I start doing arguments online. That's the first thing I'm doing, is I'm arguing with all these creationists, and it gets to the point where I'm copying the same argument over and over again. It's this is the nth guy to say the same stupid thing, that there's no beneficial mutations or there's no transitional species or whatever. And so I'm keeping a note file of all of the arguments that I'm having, and I'm revising and improving and adding to them, but it ends up being this quite extensive, huge thing. And I'm just getting to the point where we're practically just cutting and pasting the same thing to everybody. So I started realizing that this is coming down to a handful of easily determinable foundational falsehoods of creationism. And that's, of course, what started my YouTube series. Once I blocked out what those were, and how I got started with that, I commented on a group called Christian Forums. and I got into an argument with somebody there, and I put in the word foundational falsehoods of creationism, and my post was deleted for censorship reasons, because you can't be on a Christian forum and say that anything a Christian says is false. That's just against the rules. Your post gets deleted.
Now,
So I
that's
needed.
one thing that's always kind of bothered me is that um, if what I believe is true and Christianity is the right religion, then it should be open to criticism. Like, you should be able to publicly critique my views and disagree with me. So um, I definitely appreciate what you do within that, especially like on the sciences, because I think that sometimes people don't understand the sciences up front and they get very, very confused. Um, I'm, as a Christian, I'm not, this might get me some hate from some of my Christian friends, but I'm not a huge fan of Ken Ham myself, because if you tell me that you're going to form your results to match your preconceived conclusion, that's not science. Science is a very meticulous process of testable, repeatable, measurable, and just that going in a big circle. But if you already have that conclusion in mind, that's not good.
So one of the very first foundational falsehood of creationism was this false dichotomy that I kept seeing, that you either have to believe the Bible 100% absolutely literal as the Word of God and all of that, and take that even over proof that it's wrong, or you had to go all the way the other way and be like myself. You had to be a hard atheist, and and in order to accept evolution at all. So there was no awareness that, like, most Christians actually accept evolution, and that there's quite a few that are trained, especially in genetics. The geologists and the biologists are well aware that evolution is a thing that is demonstrable, that's provable. It's hard to do paleontology and pretend otherwise.
Yeah, and you brought up an interesting point too, which is, well, I believe the Bible is the Word of God. There's certain things that I don't understand, and I should be willing to tell you in an honest conversation if you ask me a question. If I don't know the answer, I don't know is not something people should run away from. It's very honest, it's very frank. Or if you say, "Hey, I've got this challenge for you," I can write that down. I can go research and study it, but I think a lot of times in these discussions, people will just throw crap at the wall and see what sticks from all sides, and it's very disheartening.
Yeah, I see that a lot too, and it's unfortunate. I mean, I try. I offer to prove evolution to, excuse me. I offer to prove evolution to my listeners' satisfaction if I've got a creationist up there giving a challenge. But what I always see, and I mean always, we've had one exception in 20 years, is well, the creationists will tell me their empty assertions, as I mentioned before, that there's no transitional species, there are no beneficial mutations, there's no whatever, or all of these arguments, all of the foundational falsehoods arguments, and I will go to prove any one of them wrong, and I can, and I've all the demonstrated examples necessary, and so I offer to do this in a Socratic method. Just let me talk to you. Let me find out what you understand. Let me see how much evolution you already accept, because everybody does. I mean, nobody thinks that God created dachshunds and Dalmatians separately. Everybody understands that there's some degree of evolution, although they don't understand that it is evolution. That the origin of species by natural selection is exactly the same process as what they call microevolution, which is how we derived different species of dogs and cattle and poultry, fowl, and all of that. They don't understand that's the same process. I'd be happy to explain that. But what I see is that people who know, when they know that something is true, but they know that they can't admit it because they have a belief system where they have to maintain the belief. And I've had people drop out numerous times, drop out of the conversation. One guy even deleted his own blog that it was arguing with me on evolution, and suddenly the whole thing is gone. I go to see his reply, and the whole thing is gone. And I search around on the web, and I find where he's posted somewhere else, that same guy, and where somebody had asked him, "What happened to your blog?" It took me a day or two to find this, but he posted that he deleted the whole thing because I was making sense. That's what happens. That I have the means to prove the point, and they don't want to know that. They want to make believe.
Yeah, and I mean, we should be willing to hear argumentation um, and science. Well, I don't believe it's the only pathway to knowledge, but I believe that it is a valid pathway to knowledge. Um, I value philosophy greatly as well. But yeah, that's disheartening that people delete blogs and posts and just like if you and I get into any aspect of this conversation and I disagree with you vehemently, I'm just going to save the video. It can stand, and then I'm going to go look it up later. Um, I did have a question. I know you're very, very big into science. Would you be more of an empiricist, or is there other pathways to knowledge that you would accept?
Well, empiricist is basing everything on your own perception, and I am open to the possibility that my perception can be flawed, that my information may be wrong. And so I have to question my sources. So I would consider myself more of a rationalist because I will accept logic on top of or beyond mere empirical experience. And people, when I say that I don't want to believe something that is not evidently true, it's because I don't want to be tricked into believing anything that is false. So I will hold a position of maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. And I'm not going to believe that until there is sufficient reason to compel a belief. So I'm not, when a believer believes, very often it seems that they mean make believe, that they're convincing themselves. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing the very opposite. I'm trying not to be convinced until, well, this is kind of overwhelming to the point where it becomes perverse to question it anymore. It's like, we don't need Cartesian skepticism. It's like, as you may know, since you said you're interested in philosophy, I mean, Rene Descartes famously said, I think, therefore I am. But then later in the same book, he recants that and says that he can't even be sure if he exists. And the only thing he can be absolutely certain of, the only thing that's absolutely true, is that a God exists. So why is Descartes still a famous philosopher, having come with a conclusion like that?
I think
And
maybe.
why is he famous for saying the thing he later contradicted in the same book?
Hmm, I always look at those kind of things as uh, people are able to grow, and maybe he wrote the stuff earlier on in concept, and then he completed it in totality with the changing of his view. I would have to go and read that source to speak to that better.
I know a perfect example of what you're talking about. Darwin's second famous, or second, his third famous book, I should say, Descent of Man. In that, he begins on the same footing as the rest of the anthropological society of his day. And they were, by our modern terms, very racist. And this was just the status quo. This was the position everybody had. This was ubiquitous throughout anthropology at that time. But by the end of the book, Darwin had become hugely progressive and anti racist. He was actually the first one to announce that all humans, that all living humans, were the same species and, in fact, the same race. Now, the way he did that took a whole page or more, depending on your print, but I mean, it was quite a lengthy explanation. Now, Franz Boas became famous for having said essentially the same thing, but in a T-shirt quotable version of it. So like the bumper sticker, succinct version. So 16 years later, he becomes famous for having said that thing, but actually Darwin had already said it, just more verbosely. But you can read as Darwin progresses, he puts thoughts down where it seems as though he's talking to or explaining things to the audience, but you get reading the book, you get the impression that he's really revealing things to himself, and you can see his perspective change as the book continues until he's now completely going against the status quo. He's arguing against all of the anthropologists of his day, and very, very specifically calling them out by name, to call them out on how they're wrong about all of them that said that there's more than one race of people. And it was quite brilliant, I thought. So whenever I hear that, well, Darwin was a racist, I'm like, no, no, he really, really wasn't. And not just in the course of that book either. In his first book, On the Voyage of the Beagle, he always, only, ever consistently argues for the indigenous people of the places that he went. He always took up their side against that of his own people. He called out the hypocrisy of how we would view, I mean, in how some native in South America was trying to defend herself, or I think she tried to kill herself. I think she flung herself off a cliff rather than be taken prisoner. And the way that the people of that time were describing it was that, they were calling her coward. And Darwin mentioned in the book that, had this been a white woman, they would have remarked on her bravery. But, and then he calls out the hypocrisy. But because she's not white, then they're criticizing her. And he, over and over, he called out racism, and his disdain for slavery. When he talked many times about how horrible it was being in slave countries, and that he would never go to a country that had slaves again. And bear in mind, that was back then, the United States still had slaves. So that's why he would never come here.
No, very, very, very interesting. A question that I like to ask, especially people who I meet who are atheists or agnostic, is what would be the best evidence that somebody's ever presented to you that a God exists? Like, was there anything that made you pause and think this might be something worth considering?
Do you want the best?
Yeah.
There would have to be an example to pick from.
So you would need me to throw out some examples?
No, I'm saying in all of my time of activism, people always claim to have evidence of God, but none of them ever actually have evidence of God. When somebody tells me how their life has changed when they became a Christian, I've already seen testimony from people of other religions making exactly the same claim when adopting a different God. I even read one from a Buddhist who said that her life turned around immediately, and that she was she was in the gutter of life. She was at the worst possible place she could be until she accepted Buddha, and then everything turned around. Now, I can't source that quote anymore because that was like in 1981 that I read that. But I mean, I've seen others like Krishnas, for example, the Bhakti Hindu, and they have a very similar sort of relationship with their personal God, Lord Krishna, as Christians do. I know a guy that lives 2 miles from my house who worships Bast, the Egyptian cat-headed goddess, because he said she appeared to him physically manifest, visible, audible, tangible, and bade him become her disciple. So of course he did. So does he have evidence of his God? I mean, she showed up, right? There's no footage. There's no confirmation of that. And there's not for anybody. If I tell a Christian that story, he will tell me that that's not evidence. That's just his own personal perception. Really? Okay. When George Harrison says that he has personally met Lord Krishna, and that he's seen Krishna and heard Krishna's voice, and that they're friends, right? What is the personal relationship there? He's seen Krishna. Krishna appears visibly in front of him. The Christian will just dismiss that. They'll make the same claim about their God and dismiss his without a thought. So if Harrison doesn't have evidence, and that the Bast worshiper doesn't have evidence, and the Christian doesn't have evidence either.
I think I agree with Oppie. When I had him on the channel, he said that the best argumentation that he's heard is an argument that builds on, where you have little pieces by little pieces that point to the potential of a God existing. And this might be a good way to transition to this other question. So I see this everywhere now. There was a video where you were talking about philosophy. And I was just curious if you could tell me what your position would be. Do you believe that there could be a first cause, or where do you land on that?
I don't think anything was ever created. I hate when every creationist tells me that you atheists believe everything came from nothing. I don't know anybody alive who believes that. I've talked with Sean Carroll a number of times about this. He's a cosmologist. He says that the universe always existed in one form or another, that it is eternal. Matter and energy, that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. That's the first law of thermodynamics. Then people bring up the second law of thermodynamics as if entropy would ever weaken covalent bonds or slow electrons down. That's not what that second law is referring to. It's not talking about, subatomic forces that Lord Kelvin couldn't have known about when he devised the laws of thermodynamics. That's not what that means. I think that whether we had a a singularity, which is not a universal concept. I mean, not everybody says that there was a singularity, but if whether there was, and it was like in a chronological stasis until time begins, if that's possible, or whether all of the matter and energy that flooded into this universe to inflate space-time in this universe come in from some other source like a multiverse or what have you. Either case, it's still eternal, still didn't come from nothing. If it's fourth spatial dimension that's flooding three-dimensional space, again, it would look like it came from nothing, but it's something. It's like if you were to walk through or have one of those what do they call those things? There's MRI, I think. It scans you in two dimensions and seems
Yeah,
like cut through
MRI.
your body. Well, here you go. You peer out of nothing, and then you see the whole thing. Well, you don't ever see the whole thing. You only see a cross section of it, and then it disappears again into nothing. But did I really come from nothing? No, I came from someplace else. I have an origin that's completely separate from what the MRI can detect. Same with us. We have a limited scope. We are talking about things that the most brilliant people alive have determined in only the last century or so. And most of what we know is from the last half of that. I mean, during my lifetime. We're not talking about in the history of humanity. We're talking about stuff that was discovered in my lifetime. And that is constantly being revised. I mean, look at it. Every time I look at physics news, there's some new thing that could overturn everything they already know, or well, not to say that anything we know is necessarily wrong, but severely revise our theories. Like, is there dark matter? Is there not? Right? Well, there's nothing. There's something on the horizon now that says maybe there isn't. So what do we know now? Well, I don't believe everything came from nothing. Sean Carroll doesn't believe everything came from nothing. Not even Lawrence Krauss believes everything came from an absolute nothing. He wrote a universe from nothing, tongue in cheek, but he and other physicists that I know have redefined nothing to mean something. And so they talk about subatomic, or the quantum fluctuations or what have you. None of it is relevant to me. I don't care one way or another. It does not matter how the universe began, if it did, and I don't think that it necessarily did. I think the space began to inflate, much as the way cosmologists describe, probably. I don't know. I have to go by their opinion because I don't study it myself. I study evolution. And so people want to tell me that however the universe began changes what I know about it. It doesn't. There could be a God who poofed everything into being by saying abracadabra, and evolution would still be real. We would still be evolving apes on a 4.5 billion year old planet. That doesn't change. Doesn't matter. If there was a God, two things. Evolution is still an inescapable fact of population genetics, fossils, and phylogeny. And the Bible is still man-made mythology with no truth in it. And the same goes for all of our other scriptures dedicated to any God. Not even the existence of God could change either of these facts.
Yeah, and I want to say for any of my Christian friends who are watching this, um, while I disagree with Arn's statements, it's important that Arn have a voice and that we listen to his reasons, his thought process, why he's coming from that. And then, so you would say that from your view on the universe, that you would say that there's always been something. There's never been a point where there's absolutely nothing in the literal sense.
Yeah.
And that you would agree that if we could demonstrate there was a beginning, then cause and effect would take in, and then
It
we
wouldn't
could say
matter.
the it wouldn't matter.
It wouldn't matter.
Mhm.
If there is a cause, then what are we talking about? Are we talking about what the string theorists propose as like a collision of cosmic membranes that cause the inflation of this universe from an eruption from their collision? Doesn't matter. Is the universe oscillating? So we have a big bang, big crunch kind of thing. Doesn't change. It doesn't matter if there is a first cause. What's that? Is it what caused the inflation of the universe? I'm going to guess from not from nothing, but from a singularity that was already there. And when I say there, that's kind of confusing too, because people say a dot of nothing exploded, but that's not what any scientist actually says, right? So it's the everything of the cosmos. It's everything that we would consider perceptible or essentially imaginable is all in one component. That's time and space in the same tiny capsule. So there's not a place to be outside of that to say that there's a there there. That there is here. We're in that there. That's that's one of the other concepts. But it doesn't matter if there was a collision of cosmic membranes or some other thing that we haven't even hypothesized yet. Maybe they'll find it tomorrow. Maybe they'll find it 20 years from now. And maybe we'll never know it at all. But whatever the real answer is, it will not be the Abrahamic God. It won't be anything like a God. It won't have any anthropomorphic. It won't care about us. It won't have dictated anybody. It won't have given signs or revelations to anybody. It doesn't care if whatever started the universe, if there was a thing that started the universe, it never gave us any prophecies. It didn't assist in any way in authoring anybody's holy books. It doesn't care whether you're circumcised.
Nope. And I think that was a succinct answer to the question. Arn, I do want to appreciate you coming on. I want to respect the half an hour time. I appreciate you doing this for me. Do you have anything coming up that you would like to plug or something these guys can look forward to?
I wish, but we haven't quite come out of COVID yet. I had this pandemic cost me or had me cancel. I forgot a handful of trips, international trips, and haven't gone much of anywhere since. But I'm fine with that. I'm perfectly happy being busy at home. I have other series that I'm working on and all of that. I don't, you know. Hopefully, I'll get out and be able to do something outside again. Not on the schedule yet.
Oh, there was my mic muted. Classic newbie mistake. So, guys, that little debate night is an advertisement. Should have a debate coming up later tonight, hopefully. Um, we like to bring different people on. Arn was kind enough to come on, explain to us what he believes and why. I appreciate it. Guys, I'm going to kick on the outro in a minute. I'll talk to Arn for a few minutes after. Thank you all for watching. Please consider checking out Aron Ra on YouTube as well.
Thank you.